In old good days, playing against Najdorf and making your choice in this position, looking for move 6, whether to play bishop e2 or bishop c4 or bishop g5 or whatever, or g3 or f4, it was very much a matter of taste. Why taste? Because the opening theory wasn't at infant stage, especially in Najdorf. And even the strongest players at that time, they couldn't go further than the level which I would call the level of the ideas. So they're ideas. There's an idea that could be tested in the game. Of course it was backed by some variations, but some. And nobody ever had a dream about the computer precisions that is required today for the preparation to be a valid one, for the preparation to be effective, and to bring results, not only at the highest professional level, but even in the open tournaments. So the players that prefer sharp, complicated, irrational positions, they of course played bishop g5. And if I say bishop g5, you can guess the names of the greatest players of that time. Tal, Spassky, Keres. And later we'll look at other options, and you can guess yourself what were the players that always wanted to stick with moves like bishop e2. But now, bishop g5, obviously the sharpest, the most complicated, and the most aggressive line. White is trying to develop its pieces and immediately prepare long castle. And then the hope is that White's advantage in the development and its ability to develop pieces in a very free fashion would play its role. One thing we should remember, and White should remember, that very often White should be ready to sacrifice the material. Because Black, if you look at the position, from a neutral angle, Black, after playing e6, will control enough central squares. So when the pawn goes on e6, there are control squares d5 and f5. But those squares are very often the best squares for white knights to be sacrificed, because the way to use your advantage in space or to use your advantage in time when you are ahead in development is to sacrifice some material, open the position, and then crush your opponent with your army that is well mobilized and could attack before your opponent, your enemy, is mobilizing its forces to defend. Let's first look at the move that is no longer a popular guest in modern tournaments. Knight Bd7. So it's an attempt to avoid very sharp and complicated lines that always arise after e6 and f4. And Black is trying to use the position of bishop on g5 to win extra time when queen attacks this bishop. And in 50s, this line was employed by some very strong players. But in my view, it's inadequate. By modern standards, we could recognize that knight on d7, in the immediate development of knight on d7, is probably premature, because it keeps white knight on d4 in its dominant position, and it doesn't prevent white from a gradual, steady development of the pieces and to prepare the ultimate assault in the center. So bishop c4, queen a5, queen d2. But when we talk about things like, white is developing its pieces steadily and gradually prepare the assault in the center, they're all nice words. But there were a number of games played before we actually reach this conclusion. So it should give you an idea that many ideas that are no longer in discussion today, those evaluations were not obvious 30, 40, 50 years ago. And this line with Nbd7 was played by such great players as Tigran Petrosian himself and Lev Pologaevsky. But let's look at the games. Two games that I picked up out of this line, among many, were Boris Spassky won very convincingly. So the game he played with Pologaevsky, it was Soviet National Championship in 1958. Pologaevsky played E6, castle, B5. It's an interesting position. It seems, if you look at this opening, that white even could play bishop d5. So that's trying to sacrifice a piece and then open all the files for attack. But then black makes its counter-sacrifice, b4, and after bishop takes e8, b takes e3. You see bishop on g5 is hanging, so that's why suddenly his white king is no longer in safety on the queen side. So white should be very careful, because black can also sacrifice a material and retake the initiative. But bishop b3, which is a normal move, bishop b7, rook h e1, very natural. So any player of any strength would be delighted to have such a position as white. But we should remember that it's all good, but white must succeed before black king finds itself in safety on g8, and then there are many options for black. One is, of course, to play b4 sooner or later and push the knight from c3. By the way, it's very important to remember that knight on c3 is one of the key pieces in these variations, in general in Najdorf, because it protects pawn on e4, and it also always threatens to jump on d5. So that's why very often after b4, knight d5 would be the best option. In fact, if black plays b4 instead of bishop e7, then of course we know knight d5 is very, very strong, and black position normally collapses. So let's go back to bishop e7, and Spassky played f4. Again, very natural. Now, e5 is a potential threat, but also is f5 is a potential threat, just to use this strength of bishop on b3. So black has to do something, and Pologaevsky played knight c5. And white has to hurry. The pawn on e4 is hanging, but most important, the bishop on b3 can be eliminated any moment. Spassky made a very natural move, e5. But what is amazing, this natural move is not the best move in the position, because, as was proven later, black could defend its position successfully. So white had to start with bishop takes f6. And then if bishop takes f6, then e5, and after d takes e5, f takes e5, we reach the position that occurred in the game, and it's in white's favor. And you will find out why taking on f6 first was very important. Because after e5, d takes e5, bishop takes f6, there is no other choice. Otherwise, if f takes e5, then knight f e4, knight e4, and queen takes d2, and white has a pretty bad endgame. So bishop takes f6, and Pologaevsky took with the bishop. But he could take with the pawn. And after f takes e5, suddenly black king goes